You would see a dentist with a toothache. If you had a mouth problem, you wouldn't be thinking, oh, I'm going to go and see a doctor or a specialist. You'd book an appointment at a dentist, and that's how it needs to be with podiatry. We were able to scan a foot, make the orthotic device on the spot, and you'd find a solution for them, literally while they waited. We were world pioneers in that. That was not happening anywhere in Australia.
The number one reason that someone with diabetes goes to hospital is actually a foot complications. They develop a lack of feeling, what we call peripheral neuropathy. Having a misaligned foot is similar to having a misaligned wheel on your car. And so that's going to have impacts on your steering wheel is going to shudder, your suspension's not going to work well, your braking is going to be impacted. So any level of misalignment can be to some degree addressed with.
Welcome to the Comfort Walk and Talk, where every step towards comfort is a step towards a healthier you.
We're your hosts, Ash,
Jeff, and Ben.
Together, let's walk the talk, transforming your lives from the ground up. All right, welcome again to our Walk and Talk podcast. We're really fortunate today to have some really special guests. Good friends of mine. I've known them for close to 10 years now. And these two gentlemen, Greg and Darren, actually launched a podiatry group called My FootDr. But the most impressive thing about all that is they created a business that they took to IPO and created the largest publicly listed company across podiatry and physiotherapy and even optometrists in Australia. So we've got a lot to talk about, and there's a whole lot of backstory as well. But my first question to you, gentlemen, is why podiatry and why My FootDr? What was the driving force behind that? Maybe, Darren, you might want to start that.
Sure, Jeff. Yeah, well, look, podiatry was a choice that I actually made as a teenager. I went and saw a podiatrist myself, and I was really... I suppose, became aware of the profession for the very first time. It was still very unknown. There were very few podiatrists, a couple of thousand in the country back in the early 1990s. And look, this guy really impressed me, fixed my problem. And I said, well, look, I think that's what I've got to do. So I reckon I was probably the only 14 or 15-year-old that knew exactly what they wanted to do and actually choose something as obscure as podiatry, which, it was a bit weird. So I went off, finished school, obviously, went and trained down in La Trobe University in Melbourne, so I left home in Brisbane to do that, and then returned back to Brisbane as a fresh-eyed 20-year-old podiatrist, and I met this bloke here who was my first boss, actually. So, Greg, you tell the story how you got into podiatry.
Woke up drunk one morning. No, just kidding. Same thing. I didn't actually have a podiatrist treat me, but I was interested in sports medicine and biomechanics, and I had a lady, a good friend of mine, Lynn Ketter, actually, who was working in I guess what's the field when students when they're looking for a career, career advisor, I guess you'd call her role. And I was in medicine and physio and all this sort of stuff. And she said, well, podiatry, they look at legs and alignment and all that sort of stuff. So that was it. I wrote that down, got into it, and really enjoyed it. And I set up a little business in Bulimba, and was lucky enough for Dazza to join me in 2000, I think, early 2000, and end of 99. I'd gone away on a holiday with Sally, with my wife. We went to America to watch the ball drop at Times Square. Yeah. And we hope, this is this Y2K thing, let's do it because the world might end. And, and we came back, and I had an acute need for a podiatrist that I had podiatrist working with me at the time decided to freeze time up, and I rang the association, and there was this young bloke that had come through La Trobe. And but we hit it off straight away. Daz's work ethic matched mine. He didn't sort of look at the clock at 5 o'clock, and if there was a patient to see, we knuckled down. And between the two of us, we set up the biggest clinic in Queensland. At the time, I think we had about four or five podiatrists, I think, working there.
And about 2003.
Yeah, and in 2004, Dazza joined, and we had to change Greg Dow Podiatry to the name, and we were just kicking around names one day, and we sort of...
and 20 years in July will be, it's the anniversary, 20 years for My FootDr. So, it's a pretty special milestone to reach as a company, and obviously a lot's changed since then. Clinic in Leafy.
2003.
Correct. It was a good clinic, and Greg's vision from the very start was to be sort of fully tech-enabled. So we had digital cameras back in the early 2000s when people didn't have that video gate analysis. CAD/CAM machine to make, orthotics on the spot, which was really a great point of difference for our business. And for those reasons, we had people visiting us from all over Brisbane, all over Queensland and beyond, actually. So we'd really carved a wonderful niche there. And the vision was that we wanted everyone to be able to access the sort of service that we were delivering at the time. And that was beyond the scope, of most clinics. Not to say that there weren't some clinics that were also aspiring for the same vision as ours, but ours was a really clear vision. And so we progressively sort of rolled out clinics, and we were doing that really organically through the young graduates that wanted to come and work for us. So we had a bit of a breeding ground at our clinic at Bulimba, as it was at the time, which is now Camp Hill, and we'd take on 2 to 3 new graduates every year. We'd fast track them through an orientation and a speedway to learning and advancement. And within about a year or two, they were ready to spread their wings. And so we had to essentially build a network of clinics.
Yeah.
And that was sort of, again, all organically done from the bank of mum and dad, I suppose. We were literally, cash funding these out of our own mortgages, which was a really great time because you felt completely in control of what we were doing, but also at the same time a bit scary. And I suppose we'd got to 15 odd clinics, including one in Singapore by 2015.
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean, it
so
was just,
10 years to get to 15.
there were green fields, grey fields, brown fields.
So what are customers? What are they looking for from like an Australian podiatrist? Because I know there's differences in podiatrists around the world, isn't there? So an Australian podiatrist, what are they really looking for? What's the key delivery from a podiatrist?
I think people are very tech savvy these days. They do know about 3D scanning and imaging. And when Daz and I started that off back in '92, I had an AMFIT system, which was I think we had the second one in the country.
So what does that do?
Well, it's basically got 512 little pins, and they come up and they touch the foot. So as Daz mentioned before, we were able to scan a foot and then send the file. Back in those days with a floppy disk, remember? They take the floppy disk and you would send it downstairs and get the file, and you'd cut it out. But literally while they waited. And we were world pioneers in that. That was not happening anywhere, in Australia, where you'd come in and basically your patient would be assessed and analysed biomechanically, and then you'd find a solution for them, make the orthotic device on the spot. And meeting guys like you and Craigie back in the day with the Dr. Comfort brand, that was revolutionary because you had a shoe that was able to be pulled apart and pull the orthotic out, had a nice deep recess where it worked perfectly for us because we had these full-length custom foot orthotics that went in and put a leather top on them, and they looked like they didn't look like they were medical. They looked like they were a good comfort brand.
And we were working in an era where, it's improved dramatically, but there basically was one choice for a depth footwear, and it was the New Zealand brand Comfs, right?
Yeah.
Obviously rebranded as Sierra later, but that's all we had. The local comfort footwear still had Comfs and maybe some obscure brands from Europe that had varying sizes and width options that didn't always work. So, when you came along with Dr. Comfort, I remember that first lunchtime meeting, and I think Greg had placed an order for 2 pairs that afternoon, which is typical of Greg. He doesn't muck around. But now, looking at the range
We
of
had to buy the
shoes,
sandwiches.
I did ask you,
Hey, don't come and see me unless you bring the sandwiches.
I learned that from
Jess was
Bill
our
Collier.
gatekeeper at the time, and our time was, we had a strong work ethic, so we were working really hard. So to carve out a half-an-hour meeting, it did, deserve some Subway, I think.
No, it
My good
didn't.
mate Bill Collier was a GP in Oxford Street where we had our clinic at the time, and I remember that was Darren and I always knew the value of our time. I mean, that was that's one of the reasons we used this 3D stuff because I remember at university learning how to make it from plaster of Paris, and you spend hours banging nails in plaster and not very accurate, trying to and this was something that we could actually. It could be milling by a milling machine while we were seeing our next patient. So we understood the value.
So let's just come back to that because, obviously a lot of our audience are people that maybe hear the word orthotics or podiatry or custom orthotics or insoles or whatever. So is it common to have different insole or orthotic on the left versus the right foot? Is that very common? Is that the norm?
It's probably about as common as having one foot different size from the other.
Yeah.
So there are going to be variances, sometimes subtle and sometimes really significant. You know, in the cases of say trauma or defect, whether that be from birth or later on, medical event.
Flat foot's always worse on one side.
Yeah, so look, that's obviously where a custom solution is really the only answer, because you'll end up either being ineffective or actually harming a foot if a generic arch support type solution is chosen. So, but yeah, it can come down to even being more subtle. We always scan the left and right feet when we're making custom foot orthotics, and that helps to just pick up those slight variances.
It's like an
between the feet.
optometrist, really. I mean, you wouldn't go to an optometrist and expect them just to do the left eye and make the same script, even though they're probably going to be reasonably close. As I said, they're going to be fairly close, but one leg might be shorter than the other. They might need a heel raise. One might be rolling in, one might be rolling out. As I said, they might have a deformity like a disease, rheumatoid arthritis, where one foot is completely more dysmorphic or changed position than the other. So you do need to scan both of them, and sometimes they don't even fit into a standard shoe. You need to make a custom shoe as well.
So yeah, well that's a good point. So with the you mentioned diabetic or extra depth footwear and all that. Why is it that footwear needs to be especially important for a diabetic?
Well, look, diabetics have an alarmingly high rate of amputation, even in first world countries like the USA and Australia, UK, Germany actually has a very high rate, probably higher in some than some third world countries. So diabetes is a scourge of modern society, and unfortunately they get wounds that they don't heal. They can't feel deformities occurring, so they might get a disease called Charcot's foot, which will be fractures that they don't feel, and the foot will completely disintegrate. So they really do need
Ugly
to,
things.
Very ugly.
It's also it's the number one reason that someone with diabetes goes to hospital is actually a foot complication and often a foot ulcer.
Unbelievable.
So what happens with diabetes is they develop a lack of feeling, what we call peripheral neuropathy.
Yeah.
So that impacts them being aware of pressure underneath their feet, among other complex medical things happening with their body, including reduced circulation and changes in their tissue habits or tissue function. So going back to footwear, the footwear sort of needs to bring back the cushion or the comfort, ensure that there's no areas of high pressure. And even if that's a foot that isn't deformed but does show signs of, say, that lack of feeling, we, as podiatrists, recommend they start to move towards medical grade footwear and appropriate footbeds or orthotics to ensure those pressure points are minimised.
Yeah, and money spent on preventative medicine, so to speak, outweighs it's like 50 times. If you spend $1 on trying to save a diabetic limb, you're going to save 50 times the amount of money to the public purse as well. So it's as I said, the hospital can be full of diabetic patients. So it's very important. It's a huge importance to have good footwear and custom footbeds.
Yeah, so here at the Comfort Co, we quite often kind of place ourselves as the last thing to try before you should go to see a podiatrist or get those custom orthotics and things like that. When would you say should be the point where someone should pull the plug and go and see that podiatrist?
I think very early on, but that doesn't mean that they need custom orthotics. Doesn't mean that they need to see a podiatrist regularly. But I think every single if we're talking about diabetic people, every single one should visit a podiatrist, and then it will be often referral to a comfort foot store to get a diabetic friendly shoe with a comfort orthotic insole.
I just meant in general. So if you got plantar fasciitis that is quite bad or any kind of foot conditions, when would you say is the time to go and see? Early on, or would you?
Look, we've come a long way here in Australia in terms of awareness of sort of foot health, and even that there are professionals dealing specifically in this space, podiatrists. Our first probably awakening to how poor we were was visiting Europe, and particularly those developed countries of Central Europe, Germany and France, Italy, Spain. They have a culture where you actually take your child to an equivalent of a podiatrist, probably before you start school or kindy, to get advice on the appropriate shoe. Is there anything that we should be concerned about? Is there anything that could be done early to prevent things developing later on in life? So I can assure you that when I first started back in 2000, people came to us basically on advice from their neighbour. They'd been to their GP and the GP had given them some medicine, and they'd gone to the physio, given them some exercises. And then the postman or the neighbour would go, months after they're still in pain, hey, maybe you should go and see my podiatrist. So, like, that's how bad it was. It's not to say there weren't great GPs and physios and some awareness out there, but the average Joe was coming in on the referral of a word of mouth rather than actually being medically referred to us. That's really changed. We're seeing, all of those medicos and allied health now actively aware of our services and engaging
Has
in that
private
referral
health
process.
changed that a bit? Or
Probably the biggest change in exposure came through Medicare when they introduced the enhanced primary care package.
what is that?
So it was basically some
EPC.
they would get a rebate from their GP up to 5 visits a year.
So they can go to a podiatrist 5 times a year, can they?
Yeah, if you've got a medical condition that involves a number of people, your GP can set up a care plan, and that care plan can then facilitate these referrals through into allied health. And it's been a raging success. And looking at the data, and I haven't looked at it for some years, but podiatry was the number one discipline in terms of uptake of appointments. There was something like 1.5 million appointments when I last looked at the data, maybe 2018. And that's even higher than physiotherapy.
Yeah.
And there's 5,000 of us in Australia and 30,000 physios.
And again, the government understands that a dollar spent on preventative problems are going to save money in the long term, save limbs. It's changed completely. Almost now, exclusively, we see patients that are referred by a medical specialist or a GP, and we've become, I guess, a specialist clinic. There's so many times where people have said, "Oh, do you guys actually treat toenails and calluses as well?" Because when we called ourselves My FootDr, the idea wasn't necessarily to try and tell people we were in medical. We were always allied health, but that's what a podiatrist is, right? A foot doctor.
Yeah.
So you go to you asked about when you should go, Benny, before. I mean, early on, because you would see a dentist with a toothache. You wouldn't necessarily, you'd if you had a mouth problem, you wouldn't be thinking, I'm going to go and see a doctor or a specialist first or whatever. You'd book an appointment at the dentist, and that's how it needs to be with podiatry. You've got a foot problem first, then podiatrist, and then it might be, okay, no, well, you need exercise physiology for this, or you need a good shoe, go to a good reputable shoe store. You know any, you guys? we know some good ones down the coast here, mate.
Got a couple, yeah.
Yeah, just a couple, yeah.
You touched on, the name Foot Doctor, which is, really what people were calling us. They weren't using the word podiatrist.
Yeah, they thought
I've got to go to the
pediatrician,
foot doctor.
Kids. Or...
But I think we always looked at it, Greg, as like this is a science, and so science is a journey of continuous learning. And so, you kept me curious, and I think I kept you curious, and we kept challenging each other to see how we could actually improve this profession, because we were really passionate about lifting the entire of the profession. And it came from a virtuous, pure place, right? Like, this was not a commercial thing. This was not about just like making money, because money always came last. This was about advancing what we did and hopefully bringing the profession with us. And
improving the scope. They called us the primary foot care providers of the lower limb. They didn't say, cut toenails or you make the odd foot orthotic. So Darren and I didn't know where to stop with, it was a foot or a lower limb problem. So it wasn't long before we got interested in making, ankle foot orthotics and going above the ankle. And I don't really treat anything below the ankle now. It's all, custom footwear, ankle foot orthotics, knee bracing,
So you guys, I mean, you created the 10 clinics, 15 clinics in 10 years, right? And you certainly, when I met you, you were considered, you were really leaders in what you were doing around this, custom and biomechanical insoles and the whole customized thing. You brought lots of technology, which I'd like to talk a bit more about. But you took it to basically creating this IPO. And I think there's something like around 90 podiatry clinics and like 100 physio clinics. And
about 100 podiatry, about 150 physio, and about 70.
And that happened in a few years after you got to, 15. So tell us what, because I heard stories like you obviously met up with the guy from Shark Tank and all that. So I'd be interested to sort of know a little bit about what took you to that step. That's a big step. That's huge.
We were actually selected or nominated as nominees of the Entrepreneur of the Year award. It's an Ernst & Young Business Award. It was, and so one of the judges was the guy you mentioned, Shark Tank, was Glenn. And Glenn Richards was a vet, started off as a vet, but then had...
Green Cross, wasn't it?
Yeah, Green Cross Vets, yeah. So aside from his thing on Shark Tank, he was a practitioner.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just... We were looking for someone at the time, or someone that could help us, a practitioner, not just make money, but how do we scale this? How do we get it from the 15 clinics to? We wanted to be in every city in the country. Our big the BHAG, big hairy audacious goal back then was to be able to have a My FootDr clinic accessible to every single Australian. And it was going to be difficult even with 15 clinics, even as the biggest in the country back then. We wanted to go bigger and bolder, didn't we, Des?
We didn't have large scale business experience. We had a really compact little management team there. It was 4 or 5 people outside of podiatrists and receptionists. So, when Glenn Richards came along, and he showed great interest after. We didn't win, by the way, the contest. So, but he showed great interest, wanted to have a coffee with us, and he said, well, where are you at? And we said, look, we don't know where we're going to go from here. We know what we want to achieve, just don't know how to quite get there. And he said, well, I think I can take you under my wing. And he did so. So I invested in, only a matter of months later, became a strategic partner. And from there, we got some bank finance so we could actually grow through acquisitions rather than slow organic growth via greenfields, put on a proper CFO so we had good financial modelling. And before you know it, we had introductions to some physiotherapists that were also had a similar vision in all sports physio. And we came together at that point in time in 2018, and the simplest way to sort of merge the My FootDr business, which had grown to about 40 clinics at that stage, and the 15 to 20 odd physio clinics, was actually to go to an IPO. And so 2018, in fact, on September 11,
Good date.
We listed after a pretty hectic roadshow through Australia, New Zealand and Hong Kong, looking at sophisticated and institutional investors, which showed great support in our business. And we stayed a listed entity up until December of last year, when we received a very, very attractive offer from a cooperative private equity partner or firm. And strategic management and founders remain equity partners of the new business moving forward, but we're a publicly unlisted company now.
So I guess the size of you now, which is a big advantage, because you said before, there was podiatry was a lot of individual clinics, and it was hard. A customer listening would, what does a podiatrist do for them? And I guess that's a big advantage now. You can really market the podiatry industry, and is that something that you're seeing has happened from this?
Oh, look,
educate the consumer, and what would you say the reason for the podiatrist is?
Incidentally, I think we've changed the industry a little bit by showing that there is a pathway beyond just small business in isolation in a cottage industry. So. I'm certainly proud about that people now have options. You don't need to
just
remain
retire,
an employee.
shut the door, you had to...
Or be a small business owner, but work and grind every day and feel fairly professionally isolated. We now have roles in education. Some move on to becoming regional partners, so they're managing a portfolio of clinics. There are specialty fields that we've set up. We run so much internal training, so people can become or go on the pathway to be doing more research or more education. They can move into a management style and become a partner in our clinic. So they actually can be an equity partner and feel real ownership of their business within our model, within the safe hands of a larger company too, that sort of protect them from all of the small business bumps and bruises. And
from the allied health business, so where they're working with physiotherapists as well, exercise physiologists and optometrists and all together.
So from the consumer perspective, because, if you think about Specsavers, right, you sort of think as a consumer, right, I'll go get my eyes tested and I'll get a new pair of glasses. That's pretty... So what would you be saying you'd want ultimately the customer to think of going to My FootDr or a podiatrist? What would you...
I think initially I'd love them to just come in and have a foot assessment. If they've got any concerns with their feet, right, feel that there is a place they can go and get a comprehensive assessment and an honest appraisal of their issues. I don't think there is a typical podiatry patient, to answer the question. It's so varied. And the sphere that Greg and I now work in, which is predominantly in rehabilitation and the disability sphere, that is hugely variable.
Yeah, it's not a sort of one size solution for everyone, and we have changed industry, Daz. We have. I mean, we didn't really sort of set out to do that, I guess, and be looked upon as pioneers of the new or modern podiatry, but we were naturally curious about what would this technology do, and 3D scanning. And then when we started making above the ankle products, ankle foot orthotics, SMOs, supramalleolar orthotics, those things, we went back to plaster again because they didn't have that. There wasn't. But fortunately, we had with Glenn Evangelista and Dean Hartley, who, when they merged with us, they had a group called Balance Podiatry. They merged with My FootDr to make My FootDr a bigger group. When we listed, we also brought Dean's curiosity with 3D printing. So he was able to, with the orthotics group, able to work with us and Darren.
They're the biggest 3D lab in Australia, aren't they?
There certainly would be one of the bigger, but they're not just in Australia. Of course, they're in New York, they're in New Jersey, and orthotics are international.
So just on the orthotics and the custom orthotics, just again from a sort of a layman's point of view, okay, you go in there, whether it's a plaster, might want to explain plaster or the 3D you're making of the orthotic. Mm-hmm. What are you actually doing when you look at someone's foot, and what do you sort of build in? What are you building into that insole?
We're looking at the shape and the tissue stresses that are there, and if someone's sort of rolling inwards, you might imagine the stress on the inside of the ankle might be, straining on the outside, might be squashing. So just to oversimplify it, if the foot's collapsing really badly in, we've got to straighten it to take
building
those
foundations,
building foundations to straighten them, because we all know that foot and ankle is going to change the knee position, the alignment of the hip and the spine, and it's going to improve their overall health. So. Yeah. That's what we're doing, and we're 3D. Darren and I, and the other pods that work in modern podiatry now are looking at something and looking at a foot and ankle structure and trying to put it back to its most optimal functioning position, so that they can have a good life.
Okay.
So you're basically turning it, putting it in a good alignment, and then working out how to do that. And that might be a simple foot orthotic. It might be just a good shoe, just a good shoe with a good strong heel counter. It might be an ankle foot orthotic.
You probably use an analogy that having a malaligned foot or misaligned foot is similar to having misaligned tyre alignment on your car, wheel alignment. And so that's going to have impacts on your steering wheel's going to shatter, your suspension's not going to work well, your braking's going to be impacted. So, if the foot's not, and, one example is a pronated or a flat foot, but any level of misalignment can be to some degree addressed with a foot orthotic. And that's where, we have that capacity to understand and look in 3D, and then you need to imagine it in 3D as you're going through design process, how you might straighten that. And, that's not a pure science, there is, they've tried to make it as scientific as possible, and there's lots of little measures that we use, but it does come down to practical experience as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned before, Benny, too, when's a good time. That's a great example. A simple foot orthotic and a good shoe might be all they need if you get them young. But the older adult that might have a few injuries and put a bit of weight on, and their foot collapses their entire life, they might get a condition called adult-acquired flat foot, where they need something that's actually more, more serious, and they might need something that goes above the ankle, or they might need a custom shoe, or they might need a boot that goes above their ankle to give them, stability and offload arthritis. When maybe if they were seen when they were early and had good footwear and simple foot orthotics back then, they may not have needed that.
So in a nutshell, the sooner the better. If you're concerned, go see someone.
I think so. I think that makes sense. Yeah.
So you guys mentioned before that you guys are really proud of the innovation that you've done within the industry. Do you have any particular thing that you've done, any innovation that you've made that you're particularly proud of?
Well, I think there's one that's currently evolving as we speak. Part of our curiosity back in about 2012 was around custom shoemaking, and this was a very small industry in Australia, less than 20 at the time, custom makers of footwear for orthopedic. We're talking fully custom bespoke footwear. So we actually went back to school through the Podiatric Association of Australia and did at least a 2-year training certification to become custom maker ped orthos. That combined with the exploration we were doing at the time around AFOs and making above the ankle devices really was perfect timing, because at that stage, the NDIS was in evolution as well.
Yeah.
And that broke down some professional barriers, which was really helpful for us. So not that we weren't practicing it before, but it's allowed us to expand certainly the volume of work we're able to deliver in that space. And so we became trained, and the natural next step was to develop an internal training program within our group as well. And eventually I think expanded out, something we coin as rehabilitation podiatry, and it equips you with the necessary theoretical knowledge and some practical skills tied in, stitched in with this digital revolution, where we're no longer plaster casting and heating plastics and vacuum forming like you used to have to do, or stitching leather in a little stitching room and trying to do all those steps yourself. Now we've basically got a system that allows you to, if they have the knowledge and you have the patient and you have a little bit of equipment, like a digital scanner and the know-how to take a good anatomically aligned scan, that you can actually deliver a variety of these products by using outsourcing essentially.
So that's great. Look, we're coming to the end of the show today, so it's been fantastic in terms of understanding some of your rise and the growth of the business and the insoles. And we're finishing on the custom and the shoes chapter. And I'd like to give we're going to have you guys back again next week to discuss that in a bit more depth, because I think there's a whole.
Get another plug, mate. Oh, that's it. You guys are out of here.
I think there's a whole story behind that, and I really, I think, and so. But thanks very much for today. It's been really interesting, and hopefully customers, our audience knows a little bit more about the sort of custom-made orthotic and where it comes from and why. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ben. Cheers,
See you
guys.
next week.
Guys.
Thank you for listening to the Comfort Walk and Talk. If this episode has stepped up your foot care game, we'd love your support with a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
And don't forget to subscribe on your favourite platform so you never miss a step on your journey to comfort.
And for more insights, follow us at our social channels at the Comfort Walk and Talk. Walk comfortably until we meet again.